Whew, that's how it looked when I woke up this morning. We're just gonna stick with it. In this video, we are building an HTPC. We haven't tackled one of those in a good while, and I've got the perfect case for it. I wanna walk you through step by step how we assemble this, and also talk about my parts choices, because, well, there are a lot of different HTPCs out there. Now, the acronym stands for Home Theater Personal Computer, although it's not really personal if it's in a home theater environment, ideally accessible by the masses in, say, a living room connected to a TV. And traditional HTPC would allow you to consume media, like physical media. So DVDs, Blu-rays, you'd have an optical drive more than likely, and you could also listen to music from it. Maybe if you have like a very beefy sound system downstairs, this is what that would be hooked up to. Though gaming was kind of an afterthought, there were some folks who tried to do it. The issue is that TVs back then didn't really have gaming capabilities. I mean, yeah, you could run games from them, but they had typically awful input lag. They couldn't really jump above 60 hertz. Interpolation and all that stuff was just pretty bad back then. Now you have OLEDs today that can run 120 hertz or higher, and even traditional LCDs have gotten a lot better in the gaming category. So the HTPC mindset has somewhat shifted. I wanted to address that because I'm sure some old timers are thinking, Greg, this is not an HTPC, where's the optical drive? We don't use DVDs anymore. Very rarely do I ever need an optical drive for anything. So we're gonna build this HTPC for the purposes of gaming and VR, because that's what entertains my family, and I'm assuming that's what entertains many of yours as well. And we've the perfect case for one. Now, I like my HTPCs to look somewhat like receivers. I just think they blend in nicely if they kind of follow that traditional look, and this Silverstone case is no exception. It is actually a case that you're supposed to lay down flat, so I have it sitting upright, but it's really supposed to lay like this and look more like a VCR, or like I said, a receiver. So when you put this in the entertainment setup in, say, your living room, it just, yeah, it looks more subdued. It doesn't look like an obvious gaming PC, which I quite like. It's stealthy. So we're gonna build a system in this thing. I think it's gonna be a different enough build that it might intrigue you. It, again, is not gonna be flashy. It's not gonna have RGB. There's no need for really any of that. It might have some lights, but we're not gonna be able to see them because this case is designed to, again, look less flashy and more business casual. I think you'll enjoy it because it is going to be a different style of build, and at the end, maybe we'll see how it performs as well in some games. Are you ready? Stay with me. If you're building a gaming PC just like we are and you're planning to install Windows, you might be thinking about how you're going to activate it. I can't stand that pesky Windows activation watermark, so I use VIP SCD key to get rid of it. To get started, click one of the links below that correspond to your version of Windows. There are several to choose from, including Windows 10 Pro, Windows 10 Home, and even Windows 11 variants. When you found your applicable version, click Buy Now. I always like to pay via PayPal, safe and secure. And this part's super important. At checkout, be sure to use my offer code GSVIP for a 30% discount during VIP SCD Key's Christmas sale. That'll bring Windows 10 Home down to $14, Windows 10 Pro to $15, and Windows 11 Pro to $21. Huge savings over retail for a key that essentially does the same thing. Once it's finished processing, you want to click the User Center button and then click on the purchase you just made. Then click Get Key. This is what you'll use in the activation tab of your operating system to fully activate it. And we'll show you how to do that later in the video. VIP SCD Key is running their Christmas sale only for a limited time, so be sure to click one of the links below to get started today. And don't forget our special offer code GSVIP for that sweet discount. This here is the Silverstone Grandia 11. Interesting name. We're gonna remove this side panel here so you can see the goodies, well, or lack thereof. We'll have goodies in here eventually. Now we'll need to remove this structural bar, not a problem, 2 Phillips screws. This also, though, connects to this tray right here, which is good for 2 3.5-inch drives. I think it sits like that right there, if I'm not mistaken. But I've removed it because we're not gonna use 3.5-inch drives. What we will be using, though, is all of this. An AM5 platform. We're gonna stick with a Ryzen 5 7600, which I know isn't like a cream of the crop or anything. I don't want to just build PCs that are like using the highest end hardware. That's no fun. I think we'll be just fine in this application with a 7600. Worst case, we'll upgrade down the line, and I'll explain my reasoning. The RTX 3080 was a tough choice. It needed to be a card that had HDMI 2.1 support, though, because we'll be connecting this to a high refresh rate 4K display. And I think HDMI 2.1 runs up to what is it? It's gonna be 4K 144 if I'm not mistaken. You can check bandwidths and things via a link in the description. There's a video we put out that will talk about some of the resolution refresh rate limitations of different versions of HDMI and DisplayPort, if you are wondering. We've got our 240mm AIO here from Deepcool. This is the LT520. Looks really nice, but again, we won't be able to see much of it in this Silverstone case. 32 gigs of DDR5, 2 terabytes of Corsair storage, and a BP710 power supply. We're not going overkill on the power supply. No need to. I think this unit is going to be just fine. Some of you might be questioning my cooler choice for this caliber CPU. Remember that this generation of Ryzen architecture does run quite hot, even the lower SKUs, and I also want to make sure that we are isolating thermals from the CPU side from the remainder of the rig if possible, since this system will be in a rather isolated, closed-off environment at the bottom of an entertainment setup. So airflow is not going to be phenomenal, let's just say. We'll start first with the platform, of course. I went with an A620 chipset this time around, which I've never worked with before. Of course, the A chipsets in AMD's recent motherboard lineups are the cheapest, or among the cheapest you can buy. So it's gonna have pretty stripped down feature sets and things. Again, for an HTPC, I'm not all that worried about it. It did save me some money because AM5 boards, by and large, are still pretty expensive. So we'll see. I'll report back if it sucks, but at least on paper, it looked okay. We'll get our CPU situated. Let's see here. Is it upright text this time around? I think it is. Drop it in like so. Lower it down, lower the arm. We'll save this for later. And then 2 sticks of DDR5. Also noticed, so another byproduct of an A series chipset and some MATX motherboards, especially ITX, you only get 2 DIMM slots. Not the end of the world. Is this backwards? Yeah, it is backwards. That is more like it. So 1 stick there and another right next to it. Now you're probably wondering what this little plastic retaining clip is. Again, another cheap alternative to screws or, I don't know, metal standoffs at the very least. This is for our M.2 drive. So we just plug this in here and it will sort of kind of mechanically fasten our NVMe. It's not terrible, it gets the job done. Fastening some AIO mounting gear. Here's one more good look at the otherwise finished platform. Not too much going on here, especially without all the shrouds and things over the rear IO. We'll take this bracket off and install the rear IO shield. Of course, it's not integrated on this cheaper motherboard. And now in she goes. Nice and gently, and yep, standoffs line up. Like I said, of course, we could have fit an ATX motherboard in here, but well, there's some reasoning behind why I've chosen a smaller board. We're gonna fit some fans at the bottom, which will actually be the left side of the case when it's laying flat, and that'll allow us to provide extra intake support for our graphics card, which will have its fans, of course, facing down here toward the bottom. We probably could weasel them in even if we had a full-size board, but I just didn't want to risk any interference there. I care more about airflow than I do expansion slots at this point. I'm going to be removing these stock fans for 2 reasons. For one, obviously, this is where our AIO is going to go. We're going to use our AIO's included fans. And for 2, these are only voltage-controlled fans, no PWM support. Not really a huge fan of this Silverstone. And it's not like this case was all that cheap either. I've got to say, it looks pretty sleek so far, and now we've got to get this block situated right about here. Basic wiring is ready to go. RGB header there connected. We've got the pump connected. The 2 fans for the AIO, for the radiator I should say, are connected there. And then we're gonna add 2 more again to feed the graphics card to connect to this hub. We've only got that 1 remaining fan hub on this board, and that is it. Interesting look, interesting layout. The tubes aren't that long, so they kind of sit awkwardly above the block. But again, we're not gonna see any of this, so I'm not super picky. And unfortunately, we won't be able to connect this Type-C cable. There's nothing accommodating that on this motherboard. We could buy some adapters, but we're not gonna get true Type-C speeds. We only have a single USB 3.0 header at that. It's not a big deal. There's only a single one of these. We can still use the 2 USB Type A ports. Power supply is up next. We're gonna do this fan side facing outward to isolate it from the remainder of the build. Also like that it's really small so it doesn't take up too much space in here. Now that it's fastened down, we can finish most of our wiring. We've got 2 extra Be Quiet Silent Wings 4 fans installed below, and most cables are now connected. We just need to cable manage like a lot. There's no space behind this motherboard tray, by the way. The way it's designed, it's all supposed to be kind of here, and so we're gonna have to finesse some things a bit. Zip ties are definitely your best friend with this build. Whew. Okay, that was kind of tough. It's graphics card time. This RTX 3080 from Gigabyte is a bit large, but according to my rough math, it should still barely fit. Oh my, this Yeah, this is close. This is closer than I thought it was gonna be. And still gotta move some cables out of the way. Holy cow, I think we need to route this stuff after we get the graphics card in just to be sure. So it should sit, wow, that just barely fits. I actually really like how tight this is, but all around, it works. It's almost like this graphics card was made for this chassis. You can see there's just a little bit of clearance there between the top of this card and the radiator there. I've got a bit of cable stuffed in front of this, and most things are cleared out here next to the fans in the shroud. Now you may have noticed I removed 3 PCIe slot covers, not 2. There's a good reason for that. I've decided to add this PCIe Wi-Fi card. It also has Bluetooth built in. Now, most of you are probably gonna be wired, but I think this is important for an HTPC because if you wanna use, say, wireless controllers and things, you're gonna probably either use dongles or something like this. I use PlayStation 4 controllers and they connect to my PC through things like this here. To be clear, I usually don't game on PC with a controller, but when I'm downstairs in an HTPC format where I might be gaming with friends, maybe running emulators and the like, it's nice to have controllers, especially wireless ones. In we go. Carefully now, it's gonna sit just above our graphics card. Now we can reconnect this support bracket. Covers going on, and here we are, a top-down view since this is how it'll sit in the entertainment setup. My office is really dirty. Ignore all that stuff in the background, but this looks really good. I'm actually really happy with the way this turned out. It was a bit difficult to cable manage. Kind of knew I was getting into that with this particular Silverstone HTPC case, but overall, pretty satisfied. Especially when you take into account how large our graphics card is, the fact we managed to still fit that. We have a 240 mil AIO in here, so I think cooling's gonna be fine given where it's gonna be situated. We talked about this in previous videos with the white Height Revolt 3 case that we built in, and that was for the living room downstairs. That build actually was pretty airflowy. There wasn't a ton of restriction baked into the chassis itself, but because of where we placed it, it did run extremely hot, which was again, not the fault of the components, more or less myself and where I wanted to put it in a stubborn sort of fashion. This is going to be subjected to very similar restrictions when it comes to airflow, and so that's kind of why I wanted to shove as much cooling potential in here as I could. With the dedicated fans for the graphics card, it's going to be pulling in air from the side. That's going to be more or less fresh air, I hope. And again, totally fresh air from the front. That will heat the internals up a bit, but you'll notice I have 4 intake fans and no exhaust fans. So we are kind of more or less just charging into this like positive pressure scenario where hopefully, again, I don't know for sure, but hopefully a lot of that pent-up air is going to be exhausted passively out the rear of the case where there are many perforations. I did entertain the idea of swapping this power supply around where it'd have an intake fan essentially from the interior exhausting air out the rear. That would, of course, raise temperatures a tad for the power supply, but maybe that would help in the long run. I preferred to isolate it for now to see how the overall system fares. And here's another look at graphics card fitment. It was very close to not working out, but I really like the way this looks. It looks like almost the case was designed around the dimensions of the card. Let's jump right to it then. Powering on for the first time. I've actually got a screen connected because the Corsair 2TB NVMe that we connected has an operating system based on AMD already installed. I don't recall where the power button is. Is it on this side? Yep. There we go. So yeah, pretty much no RGB as intended. Not bad at all. I imagine it's gonna take probably close to a minute to actually get a post because well, this being the first time this AM5 platform's firing up, it's gonna have to train memory, and yeah, AM5, it always takes a good while. I will say though, we're only using 2 sticks of DDR5, not like we could use any more anyway, there's only 2 slots on the board, so that should cut down on times just a bit. Oh, you know what I should do is probably connect this HDMI cable. Oh, there it is. No problemo. Pretty easy. Pretty straightforward build. Didn't take too long, and that's a good sign. So we'll reset the, it's usually TPM, yeah, and then we'll be able to load straight into Windows. Just tweaking some fan curves quickly here in the BIOS, gonna set the pump to full speed just for good measure. Also gonna try to enable Expo, not sure of the tolerances with this CPU, but we'll give it a shot. And I'm going to nerf the CPU just a tad, core performance boost, we're gonna disable that. This is just to keep the system a bit cooler if possible. And straight away it loads right into Windows, again, thanks to that drive that we carried over from our previous system. I'm also surprised that our memory overclock stuck. I'll have to go back and verify that, because sometimes you think it did and it didn't. AMD, like I said, can be very finicky. Now, if you were following along and say building a rig very similar to this one, it's very likely that your drive is blank. So you're not gonna load into Windows, obviously there's nothing on it for the system to load into, at which point you're going to need to install Windows. We have a guide for that specific thing in the video description if you wanna check it out. There's also one other step that you might be interested in. Cue the slide effect. Remember, Windows activation watermarks are never a pretty sight. So if you have just installed a fresh copy of Windows for the first time on a new system, or maybe you're just reformatting and you're switching components, it is very easy to activate using our sponsor, VIP SCD key. Now, if we assume you already purchased a key from earlier, all you have to do when you load into your Windows home screen for the first time is click the search bar off to the bottom left. Then type the word activate and click enter. From here, simply click the change or add product key button. And when prompted, paste the activation key you obtained earlier. Then click activate and allow Windows to work its magic. It will take usually about a minute or two. And once successful, you'll no longer see a watermark and you'll have a fully activated copy of Windows. Remember, VIP SCD key is running their Christmas sale only for a limited time. So if you're in this boat where you need a Windows activation key and you don't want to spend $100 or more on a retail key, click one of the links below that corresponds to your version of Windows. And remember at checkout to use our special offer code GSVIP for a 30% discount on your order. Again, that's GSVIP for that sweet discount. So this build turned out very nice. Thankfully, we had no issues. I've already DDU'd the old graphics driver. I think we had an AMD graphics card in this rig, or at least that was tied to this storage drive before. We've DDU'd that. We've got the updated NVIDIA drivers for this RTX 3080, and there's only one question remaining. How well does it perform? Interesting proposition, because we do have a slightly weaker CPU than you'd expect in a rig with an RTX 3080 in it, but you'll be surprised. This thing actually holds its own quite well, even in higher resolution gaming. I want to start first with 3D Mark Time Spy. Now, this is just a 1440p synthetic in the DX12 API, but this gives us a good idea of kind of where our system stacks up among all the others that have tested in this suite. And a score of better than 78% of all submitted results isn't too bad. You can see our CPU score does lag behind our graphics score by a fair margin, but I don't expect this to be too detrimental when gaming at a higher resolution. My main concern with this rig was avoiding stuttering, which is why I wanted to use a very, very modern platform from AMD, and the 7600 will do just fine in this regard. Now, for the following benchmarks, I'm going to stress the 4K resolution. This will be hooked up to my 4K TV upstairs, which does have 120 Hz refresh rate, and to my surprise, depending on the title, this system actually held up quite well. My target was, again, 60 FPS, not necessarily 120. I just wanted it to be fluid. I wanted very minimal frame time spikes, and I was able to pull that off in most cases at around the medium to high-ish preset. If I want to run emulation, that's not going to be a problem at all. If I want to run some modern AAA titles and I'm willing to scale things back a bit, that's not a problem at all either. So I would say, by and large, mission accomplished with at least the parts choice. A lot of folks think you need like some expensive CPU anytime you want to touch the 4K resolution, and that's simply not the case. Obviously, the graphics card's going to handle the bulk of that load until you start venturing into very high refresh rates, where the CPU is having to work a lot more to take care of all of those frames drawn by the graphics card. But at this point, if we play it smart and sort of leverage in-game settings to keep us around a 60 or 70 or maybe even 80 FPS target, you'll notice that the CPU actually remains relatively untaxed. It will, again, depend on the title, but by and large, the graphics card will be doing most of the heavy lifting here. Otherwise, this rig turned out very nice. I'm a big fan of the way it looks. I think Silverstone makes some really good cases. They are a bit quirky at times. Yes, they might not be the sexiest, but I mean, that's their niche. This is what they've chosen to really pursue, and I think for the right buyer, these are perfect. They can also present unique cable management and airflow challenges that you otherwise wouldn't run into with a conventional gaming tower, and I quite like that. I mean, they give you the options to expand, and if you want to increase airflow, you certainly could. You have the option to throw in an AIO. I mean, a lot of HTPCs don't usually have AIOs in them because they just don't fit. They're smaller, more compact chassis. This is certainly larger. It might not even fit in your entertainment cabinet if you have one, so be sure to check the depth. I know it won't fit in the one downstairs, but it will fit in the one that I have upstairs, and that's where this is gonna go. So just do a bit of measuring before you purchase, and otherwise I think you'll be very happy with this. So again, the Grandia 11, I'm gonna have it linked below, as well as all of the other components that we've thrown into this build. If you enjoyed watching this one, let me know by giving this video a thumbs up. That would be greatly appreciated. Consider leaving a comment down below. Let me know what you would have done differently if you were tasked with building an HTPC somewhere in this like performance range, maybe price range as well. I actually haven't priced this stuff out. I wonder if it even makes sense from a price perspective. Certainly if you could get the RTX 3080 used. So I'll have an eBay link for the 3080 down below, but if you insist on a new card instead, maybe I'll put like a 4070 or something as an alternative if you insist on buying new, and I get that to each his or her own. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Check out our social media links if you want to get involved elsewhere, and yeah, stay tuned for the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for learning with me.